Mono Blue Control, truly the most fun archetype that everyone just can't wait to play against. If you decide to put such beloved cards like Urza, Lord High Artificer, or Baral, Chief of Compliance, in your command zone for everyone to see, you'll quickly realize just how well-liked Mono Blue Control is. Now, the key to success for a Mono Blue deck is staying under the radar. You should avoid playing cards that cause your opponents to team up against you. That is until it is far too late for them to stop you. Today's commander is both a master of going unnoticed and has the power to eliminate a player with just one hit. That commander is Atemis the All-Seeing. Atemis is a 6-mana 4/5 Sphinx with flying and has the activated ability where you can pay 3 mana and tap Atemis to draw 2 cards and then discard a card. However, the most interesting part is the second ability, which your opponents will often overlook or not even read. Whenever Atemis deals damage to an opponent, you may reveal your hand. If cards with at least 6 different converted mana costs are revealed this way, that player loses the game. Terrifying. First, let's take a look at the cards that will assist Atemis in dealing damage to our opponents. We have Swiftfoot Boots, giving Atemis haste and some much-needed hexproof. Next, we have Leyline Anticipation and Tidal Barracuda. That gives us the ability to cast all our spells as though they had flash. Casting Atemis at the end step before our turn basically gives him haste. Now, if we zoom in on the text box, you'll notice that Atemis, like a true blue card, does not care about combat. Atemis' player removal ability triggers off of any damage dealt by Atemis. Harmonic Study and Psychonic Gift are 2-mana blue enchantments that give enchanted creature tap. This creature deals 1 damage to target creature or player. This makes it possible to remove a player at instant speed, most likely the player before us, so it will become our turn right after we remove a player from the game. Next, we have Sorcerer's Wand and Verdian Longbow, which are 1-mana equipment that equip 3. That also gives Atemis the ability to deal 1 damage to our opponents just by tapping him at instant speed. Finally, we have my personal favorite, Livewire Lash. This is a 2-mana equipment with Equip 2 that gives equipped creature +2 attack and has whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell, this creature deals 2 damage to target creature or player. The reason I love this card so much is because it can cause opponents to remove themselves, thanks to Atemis' ability. When an opponent targets Atemis with removal, Livewire Lash's ability will trigger and resolve before the removal spell. Atemis will then deal damage to the opponent before their spell resolves, removing them from the game and causing their spell to fizzle out. It's not just our opponents who can trigger this ability either. If we target Atemis with any of our spells, Livewire Lash's ability will still go off and we can choose who we deal damage to. These cards without Atemis in play are basically useless until Atemis hits the field, so best to keep them in our hand and pretend they're counterspells. Due to Atemis' ability to make a player lose the game for having 6 different converted mana costs in hand, we want to make sure we have 6 different converted mana cost cards in our hand consistently. In order to consistently have 6 different converted mana cost cards in our hand, we need to have a very flat mana curve. To make up for the lack of a mana curve, we need a ton of different mana ramp cards. Luckily, lands count as 0 converted mana cost cards for Atemis' ability. To start off with, we have Soul Ring, Thought Vessel, Mind Stone, Hedron Archive, Thran Dynamo. These 5 mana rocks are colorless mana producers. Mind Stone and Hedron Archive can also draw us cards by sacrificing. For our colored mana producing mana rocks, we have Midnight Clock, Patriarch Seal, Scepter of Eternal Glory, Gilded Lotus, Throne of Eldraine, and Coveted Jewel. Scepter of Eternal Glory, Coveted Jewel, and Gilded Lotus taps for 3 mana each. Midnight Clock, Throne of Eldraine, and Coveted Jewel gives us card draw to keep our hand full. Next, we have our land ramp cards, including Wayfarer's Bauble, Surveyor's Scope, and Solemn Simulacrum. Since we spent all that time searching our library for basic islands, let's make sure it's worth the effort by adding Gauntlet of Power, which makes everyone's basic islands tap for additional blue, and Caged Sun, that makes any of our lands that tap for blue mana add 1 additional blue mana to our mana pool. We're going to need a lot of card draw in this deck, so we're always ready for Atemis to deal damage to one of our opponents. So why not let our opponents help us out with this? First, we have Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study. Rhystic Remora has the ability to draw a card whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, unless that player pays 4 mana, whereas Rhystic Study has whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 mana. We're also running Nezahal the Primal Tide, a 7-mana creature that can't be countered and gives you no maximum hand size. It also has, whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, draw a card. Nezahal has an ability to discard 3 cards, exile Nezahal, then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This makes Nezahal hard to remove as long as we have cards in our hand to discard. Finally, we have Minds Aglow. Minds Aglow has joined forces, starting with you. Each player may pay any amount of mana, then each player draws X card, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. This allows us to draw a ton of cards without spending a ton of mana to do it. Now if our opponents refuse to help us draw cards, then we'll have to do it ourselves. First, the standard All-Star, Stock Up, which looks at the top 5 cards of our library and puts 2 cards in our hand and the rest on the bottom for only 3 mana. Next, we have Precognitive Perception, which draws us 3 cards unless we cast it during one of our main phases. Then it's scry 3, then draw 3 cards. Delightful Discovery has scry 2, then draw 2, and has the ability to cost 1 less to cast for each spell our opponents cast this turn. Since this deck is all about different convert mana costs and runs a ton of instants and sorceries, the Magic Mirror has a perfect conclusion. The Magic Mirror is a 9-mana artifact that costs 1 less to cast for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. The Mirror grants us no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of our upkeep, it gives us a knowledge counter. Then we draw a card for each knowledge counter on the mirror. Finally, we have Jin-Gitaxias. Jin-Gitaxias has Ward 2, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value of 3 or greater, draw a card. This ability alone is great for this deck, but the most powerful ability is the activated ability that you can only activate if your hand size is 7 or greater. The ability exiles Jin-Gitaxias, then returns it to the battlefield transformed, under its owner's control. Once transformed, Jin-Gitaxias turns into an enchantment saga called the Great Synthesis. As soon as Jin-Gitaxias turns into the Great Synthesis, you draw cards equal to your hand size, and you have no maximum hand size for as long as you control the Great Synthesis. The second ability returns all non-Phyrexian creatures to their owner's hands, and the last ability allows you to cast any number of spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. If your opponents are somehow still alive after that, don't worry, because after you cast all your spells in hand, the Great Synthesis turns back into Jin-Gitaxias, so you can do it all over again. Now let's go over the cards in the deck that don't make mana or draw cards, but are still extremely valuable in the deck. First, we have Unesh, Cryosphinx Sovereign. It is a Sphinx that makes our Sphinx's spells cost 2 less. Unesh also has a Fact or Fiction ability when it or another Sphinx enters the battlefield. Next, we have Sphinx of the Second Sun that gives us an additional beginning phase after our post-combat main phase. This allows us to gain an additional untap phase and an additional draw phase before we move to our end step phase. Next, we have Narsat's Reversal, which copies an instant or sorcery spell, then returns the original spell back to its owner's hand, and you choose new targets for the copy. This artifact causes this card to be extremely flexible because we can protect our spells from opponents' counterspells, as well as using Narsat's Reversal as a counterspell of our own. This card is an Enigma whose effect changes its use every time you play it. Atemis forces us to play expensive cards for his player removal to work consistently. This leads us to only being able to play 1 or 2 cards at a time. To help with this, we'll add One with the Multiverse. One with the Multiverse is an 8-mana enchantment that allows us to look at the top card of our library at any time and play cards from the top of our library. Its last ability allows us to cast a spell once for free from our hand or from the top of the library. Our last 2 cards for utility are Library of Lang and Trinket Mage. Library of Lang is a 1-mana artifact that gives us no maximum hand size, and if we were to discard a card, we can discard it to the top of the library instead of putting that card into the graveyard. Trinket Mage has the ability to, when it enters, you search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost 1 or less and put it into your hand. This allows us to grab Soul Ring or Wafer's Bauble if we need more mana, or the 2 equipment that can equip to Atemis to deal 1 damage to our opponent. It can also go grab Library of Lang if we want no maximum hand size. Trinket Mage's flexibility makes it a must in any Atemis deck. Now it's time to include the cards that are going to keep us alive long enough to get our win condition set up. First, we have the Deterrence, Propaganda, and Dissipation Field. Propaganda prevents creatures from attacking us unless their controller pays 2 mana for each one attacking us. This ability easily makes opponents attack other people simply because they don't want to pay the mana. Dissipation Field returns any permanent that deals damage to us to its owner's hand. This enchantment forces our opponents to make sure they don't damage us, because if they do, they'll have to constantly replay all their cards. And it can't be a mono blue deck without counterspells. Our 1-mana counterspells are An Offer You Can't Refuse and Wash Away. An offer you can't refuse counters a non-creature spell and gives its controller 2 treasures. Wash Away counters any spell that wasn't cast from hand for 1 mana, or you can counter anything for 3 mana. Next we have Regular Counterspell, which counters target spell. Arcane Denial, which counters target spell, and its controller can draw up to 2 cards, and we can draw 1 card at the beginning of next upkeep. Mana Drain counters a spell that makes an amount of colorless mana equal to that spell's converted mana cost at our next main phase. Force of Will is a counterspell that we can pay 1 life and exile a blue card from our hand, rather than pay its mana cost. Archmage's Charm is a counterspell with 2 other options. We can draw 2 cards, gain control of a non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less, or counter target spell. Cryptic Command is a counterspell with 3 other options that we can choose 2 different options between them. Return a permanent to hand, tap all creatures your opponents control, draw a card, or counter a spell. Sadly, we are unable to counter every card our opponents play, so we are going to have to play some removal. First, we have Rapid Hybridization for 1 mana. Rapid Hybridization destroys target creature, then creates a 3/3 frog for its controller. Chain of Vapor returns a non-land permanent to its owner's hand, then that permanent's controller may sacrifice a land to copy the spell and choose new targets for the copy. Sink into Superb returns target spell or non-land permanent to its owner's hand. It can also be played as a blue land if we would rather have the mana. Ugin's Binding returns a non-land permanent we don't control to its owner's hand, but once it's in our graveyard, if we cast a colorless spell that's 7 or greater, we can exile Ugin's Binding from our graveyard, or return each non-land permanent we don't control back to its owner's hand. Atemis's ability requires us to have at least 6 cards in our hand to work, but keeping our hand full while also trying not to fall behind the other players can be difficult. Luckily, mono blue board wipes help us with both at the same time. By returning everything back to hand, it returns the cards we play back to our hands, giving us a full hand, as well as removing all our opponent's threats, effectively slowing them down. Since these board wipes are so effective, we run as many as we can in the deck. We have 2 instant board wipes, Filter Out and Evacuation. Evacuation returns all creatures back to the owner's hands, whereas Filter Out does the opposite, returns all non-creature, non-land permanents back to its owner's hand. These 2 cards are great at protecting our cards from removal, as well as removing threats our opponents have. Next, we have Devastation Tide and Coastal Breach. Devastation Tide returns all non-land permanents back to their owner's hands. It also has Miracle, so if we're lucky enough to draw it as our first card in a turn, we can play it for 2 mana instead of 5. Coastal Breach returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hands, but has Undaunted, which makes the spell cost 1 less for each opponent we have. Now for our best board wipes, Consuming Tide and Flood of Tears. Flood of Tears returns all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. Then, if you return 4 or more permanents you control this way back to your hand, you can put any permanent card from your hand directly onto the battlefield. This allows us to cheat something back into play, or something new we haven't even played yet, like one with the Multiverse, for example. Consuming Tide has each player choose a non-land permanent they control, then returns all non-land permanents not chosen this way back to their owner's hands. Then you draw a card for each opponent who has more cards in hand than you. A board wipe as well as card draw, all on 1 card. Consuming Tide can also be used as a very aggressive play. Since we keep 1 non-land permanent on the field, we are able to keep a Themis in play, allowing a Themis to attack right after Consuming Tide. With each opponent only having 1 non-land permanent in play, and us having a full hand thanks to Consuming Tide, all the requirements we need for a Themis' ability are met, and a Themis can easily attack without being blocked and remove the biggest threat at the table. A Themis can only remove 1 opponent at a time, and playing extra turn spells are frowned upon in Casual Commander. For this reason, I have chosen to use end-of-turn spells rather than extra turn spells. We're running Time Stop, a card that ends the current turn, and Discontinuity, that ends the current turn but costs 2 mana instead if we use it to end our own turn. These 2 cards are extremely powerful and are well worth their 6 mana to play them. They can be used to counter spells and abilities without actually countering them by exiling all the spells and abilities on the stack, including themselves, and then directly go to the next turn before any end-step abilities get a chance to trigger. Another use is to remove all creatures from combat, preventing all combat damage. Despite these extremely powerful abilities, the reason these 2 cards work so well in a Themis is that once a Themis removes 1 player from the game, you can end the turn on another player before your opponents get a chance to stop you. Anything can happen in a game of Commander, and sometimes the entire table ends up working against you. It's times like these that you need a backup plan if you can't keep a Themis on board. Once a Themis is no longer an option, we will need to resort to Eldrazi. Eldrazi have a very expensive convert mana cost, making them perfect for just sitting in our hand for a Themis' ability. Eldrazi are also powerful enough to just win the game by themselves once they are cast. The first Eldrazi we have is All Is Dust. This is a 7-mana Eldrazi tribal sorcery that forces each player to sacrifice all colored permanents they control. Since our deck's permanents are mostly all colorless artifacts, the spell can easily be a one-sided board wipe. Next, we have Conduct of Ruin, an Eldrazi that, on cast, we'll search our library for a colorless creature card that costs 7 or more and put it on top of our library. Conduct of Ruin's second ability also gives our first creature spell each turn 2 less to cast, making our commander 2 less to cast, as well as tutoring for a 7 or greater converted mana cost card in our hand for a Themis' ability. Now for the 7 or greater converted mana cost creature we're going to tutor for, we have Emrakul, the Promised End, or Kozilek, the Great Distortion. Emrakul is a 13-mana creature that costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard. When you cast Emrakul, gain control of an opponent's next turn, then after that turn, that opponent takes an extra turn, if they're still alive. Emrakul is also a 13/13 with flying, trample, and protection from instants, making it hard to deal with. Kozilek the Great Distortion is a 10-mana 12/12 with menace, and on cast draws you cards until you have 7 in hand. Kozilek's last ability discards a card with the same mana value of target spell to counter that spell. Once one of these titans hits the field, the game is sure to end shortly. Lastly, the lands I'm running. I'm running 34 lands in the deck. Memorial to Genius, Lonely Sandbar, Sunken Ruin, Hemlar Depths, Suvillanite Temple, Saprazian Scurry, Mystic Sanctuary, Buried Ruin, Blighted Cataract, Demolition Field, Myriad Landscape, Guildless Commons, Terrain Generator, Relinquary Tower, Maze of If, Temple of the False God, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, Sanctum of Ugin, and 16 Islands. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and let me know if you have any commanders that go unnoticed for the whole game until it's far too late to stop you.